The bullet that changed the galaxy. The first time humanity encountered the Kron, it was supposed to be a historic moment of peace. The United Systems of Sentient Species had extended an invitation to Earth, an event that many believed would be remembered for centuries. The Kron were an elder race, one of the founding members of the Galactic Order, known for their towering intellect, technological supremacy, and most notably, impenetrable energy shields. The first meeting was arranged in Nevada, under the careful observation of Earth's finest diplomats and military personnel. A Kron vessel descended gracefully from the sky, its shimmering silver hull reflecting the desert sun. It came to rest on the designated landing zone, and with a hum of alien energy, a shimmering blue barrier extended around it. A force field that, according to every piece of scientific data available, could withstand anything humanity could throw at it. It was supposed to be a peaceful affair. Speeches were prepared. Scientists, politicians, and military officials stood by, waiting to witness humanity's first real step into the greater cosmic society. And then there was Private James Thompson. Thompson wasn't a bad soldier. In fact, he was considered a decent marksman back at base. But what he excelled at more than anything else was being terminally bored. Standing perimeter duty at what was essentially an over-glorified diplomatic meeting wasn't exactly the kind of action he had signed up for. He had seen the shimmering energy field around the ship, and with a bit too much time on his hands, wondered something profoundly stupid. Would my laser sight show up on that thing? It was an innocent thought. He wasn't trying to start a war. He just wanted to see what would happen. So, in a moment of sheer boredom, he raised his standard-issue 9mm Beretta, flicked on the laser sight, and aimed it at the Kron vessel. The red dot hovered on the shimmering blue energy field, glowing faintly. It did show up. That was enough to keep him entertained for about 5 seconds. Then, curiosity got the better of him. What if I actually fired? It was a ridiculous question. The Kron shields were impenetrable. They had defended against plasma barrages, kinetic bombardments, and even nuclear detonations in previous wars against rival species. No way a measly 9mm round would do anything. So Thompson squeezed the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was small, unimpressive even. Just a single pop in the middle of a vast desert. But the effect was anything but small. There was no ripple, no dramatic explosion, no burst of light or shockwave of energy, as one might expect when testing an alien defense system. Instead, there was just a very distinct, almost comically simple ping, followed by a metallic thunk. The Kron ship, a marvel of intergalactic engineering, now bore a dent the size of a bottle cap in its hull. For a moment, nobody reacted. The diplomats froze mid-handshake. The scientists stared in wide-eyed confusion at their monitors. The military personnel stiffened, hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. Thompson blinked, lowering his pistol. Oh, whoops. That was when everything went straight to hell. A high-pitched alarm blared from the Kron vessel as the shield suddenly collapsed. The shimmering blue energy field flickered, then vanished entirely. Kron soldiers emerged from the ship, their towering exoskeletons clicking as they took defensive positions, clearly rattled. A robotic voice, likely the ship's automated system, translated their frantic alien speech into precise Oxford English. KTAK la SNK defensive FAI la your. System breach, DKTCTE. Shields compromised. Requesting immediate evacuation. Panic spread like wildfire. The human delegation immediately backed away, unsure if they had just unintentionally declared war on an interstellar superpower. The Kron soldiers looked at their own ship in horror, as if witnessing the collapse of their entire civilization in real time. And amidst all the chaos, Private Thompson slowly holstered his pistol, looked around at the unfolding disaster, and muttered under his breath, "Yeah. Oh, my bad." The fallout. The aftermath was tense. The Kron had prided themselves on their energy dispersal defense matrices. They were considered the absolute pinnacle of defensive technology, rendering them nearly invulnerable to any known weaponry. But in a matter of seconds, a single primitive projectile, one that wasn't even technologically advanced by human standards, had shattered their confidence in their entire military doctrine. An emergency summit was called immediately. The Kron demanded an explanation, though their tone wasn't one of anger. If anything, it was pure, unfiltered disbelief. The lead diplomat, an elder Kron named Vitak, struggled to find the right words, his mandibles clicking in distress. "You mean to tell me," he said slowly, "that in all your centuries of space warfare, nobody ever thought to try shooting a, what did you call it?" Captain Rodriguez, head of the human delegation, did her best to maintain a straight face. "A bullet," she said. Vitak twitched his upper sensory appendages in what humanity had come to recognize as the Kron equivalent of a horrified gasp. "A bullet," he repeated, as if the word itself was some kind of blasphemy. "A tiny metal projectile propelled by a primitive chemical reaction." Rodriguez nodded. "That's correct." The silence that followed was deafening. The Kron military advisor, a hard-shelled veteran with centuries of combat experience, looked genuinely ill. "Our shields," he whispered. "They have stopped plasma bolts, laser arrays, particle beams, and even nuclear weapons. We thought they were perfect." Rodriguez shrugged. "Yeah, about that. Your shields are looking for heat signatures, radiation, and high-energy discharges. They're tuned to block the most advanced weaponry in known space. But a simple, dumb piece of metal." She smirked. "It just waltzed right through." The Kron delegation was in absolute shock. Their military strategies, their fleet designs, their entire philosophy of war, it was all built around the assumption that energy-based attacks were the primary threat. But this was something they had never accounted for. The ramifications were staggering. If a basic human sidearm could punch through their most advanced shields, then what about larger, more powerful kinetic weapons? What about artillery? Railguns? Even something as primitive as a slingshot? It was a terrifying thought. Vitak finally gathered himself, his expression unreadable. "Humanity," he said carefully, "we must discuss military cooperation immediately." Rodriguez grinned. "I thought you might say that." And that was how humanity, barely 3 months into its membership in the United Systems of Sentient Species, became the undisputed authority on military defense, by teaching some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy how to stop bullets. Or, as Private Thompson would later put it, "I just wanted to see if my laser sight would show up. Who knew I'd break the galaxy?" The day the galaxy stood still, the news spread like wildfire across the galactic community. The impenetrable Kron shields, an innovation that had shaped space warfare for over 12,000 cycles, had been rendered useless by a mere 9mm bullet. No classified experimental weapon, no cutting-edge technology, just a primitive lead projectile fired from an Earth-standard sidearm. At first, many refused to believe it. The Kron, after all, were a highly respected and feared military force. Their shields had successfully defended against entire planetary bombardments, holding strong against weaponized energy that could reduce moons to dust. The idea that a human, a low-ranking soldier at that, had casually shattered the foundation of their military superiority was simply too absurd to accept. And yet, the footage from the first contact meeting in Nevada spoke for itself. The shield had flickered, collapsed, and left the legendary Kron warship helpless against what amounted to a glorified rock hurled at high speeds. The galactic order had been shaken to its core. A galactic crisis. Panic soon followed. The United Systems of Sentient Species, USSS, convened an emergency summit, their encrypted transmissions buzzing across deep space relays. Every major faction, from the insectoid Xerexi to the crystalline Paxians, demanded an explanation. Had humanity been hiding its true power all this time? Did they possess other, even more terrifyingly simple weapons that could render the galaxy's most sophisticated defenses obsolete? For humanity, the situation was both hilarious and deeply concerning. In a matter of hours, Earth had gone from being seen as the naive newcomers of the galactic stage to the most unpredictable and potentially dangerous species in the cosmos. Leaders from across the galaxy began questioning their military strategies, scrambling to understand how they had overlooked such a glaring weakness in their technology. The irony wasn't lost on humanity's own leaders. The truth was, humans had never been the most advanced species. Not by a long shot. They lacked interstellar empires, world-killing dreadnoughts, and planet-sized AI constructs that could predict the outcome of battles before they even began. But what humanity had, what it had always possessed, was the ability to adapt. And now, the rest of the galaxy was scrambling to catch up. The Cryans' desperate plea. 2 days after the incident, a delegation of high-ranking Kryn officials arrived in Earth's orbit. Their arrival was not a diplomatic formality. It was a desperate plea for assistance. Captain Rodriguez, now the unofficial ambassador of human military doctrine, was summoned to meet them at a secure facility in Washington, D.C. Alongside her were several top military advisors, intelligence analysts, and, of course, Private James Thompson, the man who had unknowingly rewritten the rules of intergalactic warfare. Vtak, the head of the Kryn delegation, wasted no time with pleasantries. "We need your help," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed desperation. Rodriguez folded her arms. "With what exactly?" "Rebuilding our defenses. Our shields. They are worthless now. If kinetic weapons can pass through them, then we are vulnerable in ways we cannot afford. Every species with access to projectile-based weaponry, whether primitive or advanced, could exploit this weakness." Rodriguez exchanged a glance with General Carter, one of Earth's leading military strategists. The situation was obvious. The Kryn weren't just worried about humanity. They were terrified of what would happen when the rest of the galaxy inevitably started testing kinetic weapons against their forces. For centuries, the Kryn had held a position of dominance, protected by their energy barriers. They had been untouchable. Now, they were nothing more than sitting ducks. And they knew it. Private Thompson, who had been silent up until this point, cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, what do you want us to do? Give you guys guns?" The room went silent. Vtak's sensory appendages twitched in clear discomfort. "We would rather not resort to such primitive tools." Rodriguez smirked. "Then what do you expect us to do? Give you new shields?" Vtak hesitated before answering. "We believe your species has a unique perspective on warfare. You think differently than we do. Perhaps you can help us develop alternative defensive measures." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, thinking. The Kryn weren't just asking for shields. They were asking for something that could keep them at the top of the galactic food chain without forcing them to lower themselves to humanity's so-called barbaric level. But deep down, everyone in the room knew the truth. Kinetic warfare had just changed the game, and no amount of theoretical defense systems could erase that fact. The lessons begin. The next few weeks were filled with some of the most bizarre military exercises in human history. At a classified training facility in the Nevada desert, Kryn soldiers were put through a crash course in humanity's primitive methods of combat. They learned how to fire handguns, rifles, and shotguns. They were taught the importance of cover, movement, and strategy, things their species had never needed to consider before, since they had always relied on their shields. Many of them struggled. Their exoskeletal bodies were built for grace and efficiency, not the chaotic, close-quarters brutality of ballistic warfare. The idea of actually dodging bullets rather than letting shields absorb the impact was utterly alien to them. But they adapted. Slowly. Lieutenant Kim, the lead instructor for projectile-based combat, watched with a mix of amusement and exasperation as a group of Kryn soldiers fumbled with a firing range exercise. One of them, a particularly stubborn recruit named Celta, aimed his weapon, fired, and missed the target entirely. His mandibles clicked in frustration. This is inefficient. It lacks the elegance of energy-based warfare. Kim smirked. Yeah, tell that to the guide who got shot. Celta turned to her, tilting his head. Human combat is different. You do not rely solely on technology. You rely on instinct, unpredictability. That is what makes your methods dangerous. Kim nodded. You're damn right. The realization. As the training progressed, the Kron began to understand something even more terrifying than their shield's failure. Humanity wasn't just dangerous because of their weapons. They were dangerous because of how they thought. Every other species in the galaxy had followed a linear path of technological progression. They had abandoned older methods of warfare, believing them to be obsolete. They had placed their faith in energy-based defenses, convinced that the future would always be built on the foundation of the past. But humanity never discarded a tool that worked. They had learned from every era of their history, taking what was useful and keeping it, no matter how primitive it seemed. They didn't view progress as a straight line. They saw it as an arsenal, a collection of ideas and methods that could be mixed, matched, and reinvented as needed. And that, more than anything, was why they had just rewritten the rules of war. The offer. By the end of the training cycle, the Kron delegation was no longer debating the merits of ballistic weaponry. They were asking how soon they could start producing their own. Vitak, now visibly humbled, approached Rodriguez with an offer. Humanity, he said carefully, would you consider becoming the official military advisors of the United Systems? Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. You want us to train the entire galaxy? Vitak nodded. It is clear that we have much to learn. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Kim and Thompson, who both grinned. Well then, she said, welcome to Human Military Science 101. And with that, the fate of galactic warfare was forever changed. The rise of kinetic warfare. The invitation was unprecedented. The United Systems of Sentient Species, a coalition of hyper-advanced interstellar civilizations, had formally requested that humanity, previously seen as the galactic newcomers, become their primary instructors in military science. For many on Earth, the idea was laughable. Humanity, barely capable of interstellar travel, was now being asked to teach some of the most powerful species in the galaxy how to fight. But those who had been following the situation closely knew the truth. It wasn't about technology anymore. It was about tactics. It was about adaptability. And most importantly, it was about perspective. So, with cautious optimism and a fair amount of disbelief, the United Nations, in cooperation with Earth's various military organizations, established the Terrestrial Combat Academy, headquartered on Europa, Jupiter's frozen moon. The official motto. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Arrival of the galactic trainees. The first wave of alien military personnel arrived 3 months after the Crown's initial request. They came from over a dozen species, some familiar with human contact, others encountering Earthlings for the first time. The delegation included towering insectoid warriors, sleek crystalline strategists, and hulking reptilian brutes who, despite their overwhelming physical prowess, had come to learn from the primitive species that had shattered the foundations of galactic warfare. And leading the human instructors, Captain Rodriguez, Lieutenant Kim, and to the endless amusement of the human military, Sergeant James Thompson, the very man who had unknowingly kicked off this entire mess. As the alien officers disembarked from their ships, they were met by Rodriguez and her team on the Academy's training field. The landscape had been carefully designed to accommodate a variety of atmospheric and gravitational conditions, ensuring that every species could train under optimal conditions. Rodriguez stepped forward, hands behind her back. "Welcome to the Terrestrial Combat Academy," she said, addressing the assembled aliens. "You are here because your species have come to understand a simple truth. Shields are no longer enough. Warfare has changed. And if you want to survive, you need to change with it." There was a murmur among the delegates. Some of them still found it difficult to accept the reality of their situation. Rodriguez smirked. "We'll begin with a simple lesson. She nodded toward a row of human soldiers standing at attention, each one holding a different type of projectile weapon. Some wielded modern firearms, others crossbows, and a few held nothing but spears. "Let's start with the basics," she continued. "Most of you have never used weapons that don't rely on energy or plasma. But here's the thing, ballistic weapons don't care how advanced you are. They only care about physics." She gestured toward a line of alien-made energy shields standing in the distance. These were the same shields that had once been considered invincible. Rodriguez turned to one of her soldiers. "Private, if you'd be so kind." The private, a wiry man with a mischievous grin, raised an old-fashioned longbow, drew back the string, and loosed an arrow. It sliced clean through the energy barrier, embedding itself deep into the training dummy behind it. The reaction from the aliens was immediate. Some gasped. Others let out shocked, chittering noises. A few stood frozen, their complex brains struggling to process what they had just seen. "See that?" Rodriguez said. "Your shields are sophisticated, but they're looking for high-energy signatures. That arrow? Just wood and metal. No radiation, no power source, no advanced tech. Just a simple projectile moving fast enough to kill." Tack, the Kron diplomat who had led the charge for this training program, stepped forward, his mandibles clicking in contemplation. "Your species is dangerous," he murmured. "Not because of your weapons, but because of how you think." Rodriguez grinned. "Now you're getting it." Practical lessons in warfare. The following weeks were a crash course in the art of kinetic combat. The Kron, previously reliant on their energy-based defenses, were forced to adapt to a world where cover and movement mattered more than raw technological superiority. The Paxians, who had never wielded weapons more primitive than particle rifles, found themselves learning how to load and fire bolt-action rifles, their crystalline hands struggling at first, but slowly mastering the process. The insectoid Sarexi warriors, who had dismissed melee combat as archaic, were introduced to the terrifying efficiency of edged weapons. They watched, horrified yet fascinated, as a human combat instructor demonstrated the lethality of a combat knife in close quarters, carving through synthetic training dummies with ease. Sergeant Thompson, much to his growing amusement, had been put in charge of the weapons of the past course, which covered everything from slingshots to catapults. One day, a group of Kron soldiers approached him with an odd request. "We have been studying human warfare extensively," one of them said, his voice hesitant, "and we wish to understand your greatest historical battles. We wish to see the strategies that have defined your species." Thompson, unable to suppress his grin, leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "how do you feel about World War I?" The shocking revelations. As the training program continued, the alien recruits began to notice something unsettling. Humanity wasn't just teaching them how to shoot guns or wield knives. They were teaching them how to think. In their own societies, military doctrine had been rigid for centuries. Wars were fought in predictable patterns, with armies relying on massive energy barrages and overwhelming technological superiority. But humans thrived on unpredictability. They taught the aliens about guerrilla tactics, about how a smaller, weaker force could systematically dismantle a technologically superior enemy through creativity and strategy. They demonstrated the power of ambushes, of psychological warfare, of misinformation campaigns that could turn the tide of battle before a single shot was even fired. And then there was the real kicker: humanity's ability to fight dirty. One day, during a practical exercise, a group of Kron soldiers faced off against a human squad in a simulated combat scenario. The Kron, confident in their advanced sensors and precision targeting systems, moved in a strict formation. They were promptly annihilated. Why? Because one of the human soldiers had thrown sand in their leader's face before tackling him to the ground. That is dishonorable. One of the Kron protested after the match. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "No, that's war. The galaxy changes forever." By the end of the training cycle, something had shifted in the galactic order. The Kron had officially begun production on their own line of ballistic weapons. The Paxians were developing hybrid firearms that combined human simplicity with their own crystalline technology. The HFY were now experimenting with melee combat, adapting human sword-fighting techniques to their own biology. And most terrifying of all, the U.S. had officially restructured their entire military doctrine based on human principles. Rodriguez, standing before her alien graduates on the final day of training, took a deep breath. "You came here thinking humans were primitive, that our weapons were outdated, our methods barbaric. But now, you understand the truth." She looked at the assembled soldiers, warriors from across the galaxy, now trained in the art of kinetic warfare. You don't need the most advanced technology to win a war. You just need to be the most unpredictable. And that, she smirked, that's what humanity does best. As the first class of the Terrestrial Combat Academy graduated, the galaxy would never be the same. The unthinkable war begins. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an intercepted transmission. It was garbled, barely intelligible, but one phrase stood out clearly in the audio. "We are not prepared for this. The bullets. The transmission cut out. Rodriguez stood in the dimly lit command room of the Terrestrial Combat Academy, staring at the decrypted message with a frown. Across from her, Vitak, the Kron diplomat who had once believed his species' defenses were impenetrable, sat stiffly, his mandibles twitching in distress. "Who sent this?" Rodriguez asked. General Carter, one of Earth's top military minds, adjusted his uniform and exhaled. "One of our deep space listening posts intercepted it from the Zorvan frontier. It's one of the outermost territories of the U.S. From the sound of it, somebody's getting their asses handed to them." Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Kim, who had been quietly reviewing additional data from the intercepted signal. "You think this is about us?" Vitak's mandibles clicked. "There is no doubt. The knowledge of kinetic weaponry has spread. Someone out there is using it." For centuries, space warfare had followed predictable patterns. Fleets clashed in massive displays of energy-based firepower, with battles often decided by whose shields could last longer. But humanity had changed all that. With the revelation that simple, solid projectiles could bypass even the most sophisticated defenses, the entire balance of power had been thrown into chaos. Some species had eagerly embraced kinetic warfare. Others had resisted. And some, Rodriguez had no doubt, had chosen to exploit the newfound weakness in their enemies before they could adapt. A war was brewing, and if the intercepted distress call was any indication, it had already begun. The attack on Zorvan Prime. By the time the U.S. fleet arrived at Zorvan Prime, it was already too late. The planet's orbital defenses had been crippled. Its planetary shield, once considered unbreakable, lay in ruins. Fires raged across the surface, and the once proud Zorvan military, known for its towering mechs and energy lances, had been reduced to scattered pockets of resistance. Rodriguez stood aboard the bridge of the U.S. flagship, watching the destruction unfold through the viewport. "Who the hell did this?" she muttered. Admiral Rinix, a towering reptilian Xerexi commander, turned toward her with a grim expression. "We are still determining that, but the weapon signatures are troubling." A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the command deck. It showed footage recovered from the battle. Zorvan soldiers scrambling to take cover as streaks of incoming projectiles tore through their defenses. Not energy blasts, not plasma beams. Bullets. Rodriguez narrowed her eyes. Somebody took our lessons a little too seriously. Vitak watched the footage in horror. This is a massacre. The Zorvan military had no countermeasures. Because they thought they didn't need any, Rodriguez said bitterly. The reality was grim. When humanity had first demonstrated the power of kinetic warfare, some species had moved quickly to adapt. The Kron, for example, had begun developing hybrid shields that combined energy dispersion with physical barriers. Others, however, had dismissed the threat. convinced that their existing technologies would be enough. The Zorvan had been one of them. And now, they were paying the price. The search for the aggressors. A fleet-wide alert was issued. The U.S. declared a state of emergency, mobilizing forces across known space to identify the attackers. Some suspected it was a rogue faction. Others feared an entirely new enemy had emerged, one that had figured out how to weaponize humanity's lessons before anyone else could counter them. Rodriguez, Kim, and Thompson were sent on a classified mission to recover survivors and gather intelligence. The surface of Zorvan Prime was unrecognizable. Once a gleaming metropolis of towering structures and technological marvels, it now looked like a battlefield straight out of humanity's history books. Streets littered with debris, smoldering buildings, the acrid scent of burning metal. As they moved through the ruins, they found scattered groups of Zorvan soldiers, shell-shocked, wounded, and utterly unprepared for what had hit them. One of them, a high-ranking officer named Commander Xilin, managed to regain some semblance of composure as Rodriguez approached. "Who did this?" she demanded. Xillin's crystalline skin shimmered weakly in the firelight. "We do not know. They came without warning. Their weapons," he looked down at a piece of shattered Zorvan armor. "They tore through us like we were nothing." Rodriguez frowned. "Did you see them? Their ships? Anything?" Xilin hesitated before nodding. "Not their ships, but their soldiers." He gestured toward a fallen enemy combatant, partially buried beneath the rubble. Rodriguez and Thompson moved toward the body, carefully lifting debris away. When they finally got a good look, what they saw made their blood run cold. The enemy soldier was Kron. Betrayal. Tak's mandibles clicked furiously as he processed the revelation. Impossible. No Kron would do this. Rodriguez tossed him a spent shell casing recovered from the battlefield. "Then explain why your people are using our weapons to wipe out an entire planet." Tak studied the casing, his body trembling slightly. This is not the work of the Kron government." He looked up, his sensory appendages stiff with realization. "This is the work of the sovereign clans." Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Kim. "I'm guessing they aren't exactly your best and brightest." Vitak exhaled, the sound resembling a deep insectoid hiss. "They are extremists, warriors who believe in the old ways of conquest. They rejected our membership in the U.S., believing it made us weak. If they have obtained kinetic weapons," Kim finished the thought, "they just became the most dangerous faction in the galaxy. A race against time." The sovereign clans had taken humanity's lessons and turned them into a weapon of terror. They had learned faster than anyone had expected, embracing the brutal efficiency of kinetic warfare and using it to carve a path of destruction across unprepared worlds. And if they weren't stopped now, they would spread their war to every species still clinging to outdated energy-based combat. Rodriguez took a deep breath, staring out at the ruined landscape of Zorvan Prime. Humanity had changed the galaxy. Now, they had to save it. She turned to Vitak. "Get me a direct line to the U.S. High Command. Tell them Earth is leading the counteroffensive." Vitak hesitated. "You are certain?" Rodriguez's expression was stone cold. "We taught them how to do this. That means it's our responsibility to stop them." And with that, humanity prepared for the first interstellar war fought on their terms.